There, it's Lara here. It is December 9th, 2020, and I'm here with your weekly astrology forecast. Thanks for joining me. So we have so much to talk about in this video, and frankly, it's a little overwhelming. So I'm trying to keep it, I'm trying to keep it simple for you here. I did write a blog post. I posted it yesterday. And I want you to know that that is sort of, supplement to this video, or they complement each other. So I'll leave a link to the blog post below, and you can have a read of that if you're interested as well. So I want you to know right from the start here that I may not be here next week. So I need to take a little bit of time to get some things organized myself. And I really feel like in this video, we are addressing the grand finale of 2020, if you will. So I'm not sure how much more there's going to be for me to say. I mean, there's always more to say, but in another video, we do have the year closing out on a full moon in Cancer on December 29th. So I'll come back for sure and talk about that at some point. But I'm just kind of letting you know, I'm not too sure what the next couple of weeks are going to look like. But you can always catch me over on Facebook and Instagram. I know not everybody loves Facebook. It is what it is. It's what we have right now. And so, I'm over there more often than I am here, which is generally once a week. So you can catch me over there if you want, and the links are below. And you can also, of course, head over to my website as well, and the link is below there. Excuse me. All right, so we have the moon in Libra today as I'm recording this. I always start out by telling you where the moon is at, because the moon is our closest sort of connection to, like our daily ebbs and flows, right? And when we pay attention to the moon cycles, we really get a sense of how we are connected, right, to the universe, to nature, to the planets and that sort of thing. And I do still have over on my website the guide to working with the moon for you that you can grab for free if you want. But that's what I always start out by doing. So the moon is in Libra. She's going to move into Scorpio on Friday. And so we are once again in the monthly cycle entering that dark moon phase, right? Which is the time just before the new moon. And that's a time you always hear me saying of sort of retreating, of, we often crave more rest at that time and a little less human interaction. Although, most of us aren't getting a whole lot of that in real life anyway, or a lot of us aren't. So, we've got the dark moon, and then the moon will enter Sagittarius on Sunday at the end of the weekend. And we have that solar new moon eclipse in Sagittarius on Monday, on the 14th. And that's what last week's video was all about. Right. So right now we're still between eclipses. I talked about the Gemini full moon lunar eclipse 2 videos ago. Last week I talked about the Sagittarius one. So that's still, that event is yet to come at the time of this recording, right? So it's happening on the 14th. If you haven't listened to that video, definitely go listen to that. And then the moon will move into Capricorn on Tuesday, and we'll get that last hit of the moon in Capricorn, where Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn and Pallas Athena have been, right, all year and even before that. And the moon will be triggering those points one last time. And then moving into Aquarius on the 17th, which is where the action is headed, right? And Pisces on the 19th, and then Aries on Monday the 21st, which is the day of the solstice and the Great Conjunction that we're going to talk about. And then I wrote about in a blog post yesterday. And then she will move into Taurus on the 24th. So, if you're somebody who is celebrating Christmas or Yule around that time, or the solstice, that sort of in that time, then we've got the moon in Taurus happening over those few days. So that's it's comfy, so that's good. All right. So let's run down the list. Let's run down the list of events that are going on over this next little bit. It's really remarkable. We just had Asteroid Pallas, Athena, enter Aquarius on the 7th. And so she, we don't always talk about the asteroids, or lots of astrologers don't, and I'm no expert, but, I do pay some attention to them. And so Asteroid Pallas is sort of leading the charge into Aquarius, where Jupiter and Saturn are soon to be, right? In their conjunction. And she is sort of this energy of the strategic planner, the creative problem solver, right? The feminine warrior type energy. And so she's heading into Aquarius, leading the charge into Aquarius. So she's there at the time I'm recording this video. And then, over these few days, as I mentioned in last week's video, there's not a ton going on until we get to the 14th, right? So right around there, that's when huge shifts start to happen. So we've got, not to say that huge shifts have not been happening all year, but as we've been saying, 2020 is not leaving quietly. And this is why. So on the 14th, we have that solar eclipse in Sagittarius, right? New moon solar eclipse, which was last week's video. So I'm not going to go over that here. All the details about that are in last week's video. Then the day after that eclipse, Venus is leaving Scorpio, where she was in her detriment, right? Which is the sign opposite the sign that she rules. And so, because Venus rules Taurus, right? Opposite Scorpio. So Venus is leaving Scorpio, where she hasn't been really all that comfortable. And, she's far away from home. Think of it that way, opposite her home. And then she's entering Sagittarius on the 15th. And so she's a little bit more comfortable there in Sagittarius. It's not her favorite place to be, but she's more comfortable there than in Scorpio. And then we've got Saturn on the 17th, finally leaving Capricorn, where we know Saturn has been for the last 2.5 years, right? So Saturn is entering Aquarius on the 17th. And it's important to note that Saturn made dipped into Aquarius between March and June. Think about what was going on then, right? We had protests and the first wave of COVID. Lots of things were going on, but we had Saturn sort of went and made this kind of reconnaissance mission around that time, dipped in and dipped its toes in the Aquarian energy. And now on the 17th of December, Saturn will be entering Aquarius for the long haul for the next 2.5 years. Now, Saturn rules Aquarius in ancient astrology, right? So we think of the modern ruler as Uranus. When Uranus was discovered, it was sort of assigned to Aquarius, but the ancient peoples who studied astrology said that Saturn ruled Aquarius, both Capricorn and Aquarius, which are signs that are back to back, right? And so Saturn is leaving one of its homes, right? Capricorn, and moving into another one of its homes. Lucky Saturn, right? It's got two homes. And so moving into Aquarius. And, this is a place where Saturn is true to nature, right? But it's interesting because some people have a hard time understanding why Saturn, what association Saturn has with Aquarius, because we think, especially modern astrologers, think that Uranus and Aquarius have more in common, being a bit of a, the wild card energy, so to speak, a bit eccentric, that sort of thing, rebellious, but Saturn, if you think about Saturn, the way that I sort of conceptualize it, right? I think about the boundaries, right? The ring around Saturn as boundaries in a sense. And Saturn is associated with the concept of boundaries, right? And I feel like there's this notion of, Saturn and Capricorn kind of likes to color in the lines inside the boundaries, right? Saturn in Aquarius likes to push the boundaries, likes to color outside the lines a little bit. It's that sort of energy. It's also, and I know there's a lot of reasons in ancient astrology why Saturn is related to Aquarius, and I'm starting to learn more and more about that. I'm a kind of a newbie to that, right? So, but I had always had this concept myself before I learned anything about that. I had this notion of why is Saturn related to Aquarius? And that's what made sense to me. This whole notion of boundaries. And what I was saying is that Aquarius is a fixed sign as well, right? A fixed air sign. And so it is attached to the way that it sort of thinks about and sees the world, right? And so that's a bit Saturnian in nature, that whole sense of these are the rules as I see them, right? So there's that as well. Nevertheless, Saturn moving into Aquarius, it's second home. And so we'll continue to operate true to nature there, right? Saturn, boundaries, rules, structures, responsibility, these kinds of concepts. And then we have Jupiter on the 19th entering Aquarius. And Jupiter spends about a year in each sign. So Jupiter will be in Aquarius for the next year, and then we'll leave Saturn to carry on Saturn's work there, and Jupiter will move off into Pisces, where it's very comfortable. So the good news about Jupiter moving into Aquarius, though, is that it's moving from a place where it really wasn't comfortable in Capricorn, right? Capricorn is the sign of Jupiter's detriment. So it is, not detriment, fall. Those are two similar, but not exactly the same concept. So Jupiter is fall in Capricorn, meaning it's this really place that it's not that welcome and doesn't really like to be there, right? Doesn't really like to visit Capricorn so much. So when Jupiter moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, it does, it picks up dignity. Basically what that means is, it's not moving into its favorite place to be, but it really likes to be in Cancer, and then it's at home in Pisces and Sagittarius. But it's okay. It's better in Capricorn or in Aquarius than it is in Capricorn. So that's really good news. And Jupiter, is this planet associated with the concepts of growth and abundance and optimism and expansion and wisdom, and truth seeking and these sorts of things as well. So we've got, within 2 days, Saturn and Jupiter both entering Aquarius. And then on the 20th, Mercury is leaving Sagittarius, which is a place that Mercury doesn't love to be either, right? Because Mercury kind of likes the details, and Sag likes the big picture. So it's a bit prickly in there for Mercury. And it's far away from its home, from its comfort zone when it's in Sagittarius. So Mercury is moving into Capricorn on the 20th. And then on the 21st, this is, the big, kind of like the grand finale of 2020 is on the 21st. On the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, it's summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, the sun moves into Capricorn. That's what marks the solstice, right? When the sun hits 0 degrees Capricorn, that is the initiation of the winter solstice, which is, that date marks the longest night of the year. But after that, there is a return to the light, right? So at this time of year, we celebrate a return to the light, where from that point forward, from the solstice point forward, the days start getting longer again. So that is good news. That's something to, celebrate and look forward to. And so this is why, we have things like Yule logs and Christmas lights and candles and that sort of thing around this time of year, right? So the sun moves into Capricorn, and right at that same time, Jupiter and Saturn align in the sign of Aquarius at 0 degrees. The sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn. Jupiter and Saturn are at 0 degrees Aquarius. And this is what we call the Great Conjunction, right? So, the solstice is at this cardinal point of Capricorn, right? The cardinal signs initiate things. And Jupiter and Saturn are beginning a whole new cycle. I'm going to expand on that in a minute. So this is a real huge sort of jumping off point. We are at ground zero of a whole new era. So I'm going to show you the chart before I continue to talk here. So here's the chart for this solstice and Great Conjunction. And so the significant things to point out are there are Saturn and Jupiter at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Pallas Athena is a few degrees ahead of them, as I mentioned. The sun at 0 degrees Capricorn, right? Marking the solstice point. There are some other things I could point out here. I think it's interesting that Uranus is exactly conjunct Black Moon Lilith in Taurus, right? Uranus, modern ruler of Aquarius. And I think it's interesting that Mars is exactly conjunct Eris as well in Aries. So, there's some other interesting things. Of course, Neptune is there still squaring the nodes. We've talked about that in past videos. But the real important thing to note here is, Jupiter, Saturn, and the solstice point. So before I forget to say this, let me say that if you have significant placements in your chart that hover around the 0 degree Aquarius point, right? So that would be like the last few degrees of the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, or the first few degrees of the fixed signs, which are Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio. Then this is perhaps a more personal big deal for you. However, it's, when Jupiter and Saturn come together, they're the interpersonal planets, the social planets. They are indicative of, the sort of the interaction between the individual and society. And so it's like this, their coming together marks major societal shifts and changes. And so, if you have placements around those degrees that I just mentioned in your own personal chart, it impacts you more personally, right? Now, but that, like I said, that's not to say it's not impacting all of us, because we're all part of society, right? We are. I talked a lot about the significance of the Great Conjunction in the blog article yesterday, but I'm just going to say I'm going to repeat a couple of things, and I'm going to talk about a few new things that I didn't talk about in the article yesterday. So, when Saturn and Aquarius come together, Saturn and Jupiter come together in Aquarius, it is a major turning point, most definitely. It's the end of an era and the beginning of a whole new era, as I mentioned. I think that some of the things we're likely to see, because this is happening in the sign of Aquarius, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second, are things like, mass technological and scientific innovations. This doesn't always necessarily mean those things are positive or welcome or good, though, right? Sometimes, like, Aquarius has this bit of sense of emotional detachment. And so sometimes it's like science for science sake, if you know what I mean. So there's possibility that those kinds of things could happen. Microchipping people and that sort of crazy stuff you hear about. I also think, though, that we're in for some pretty significant leaps in terms of our approach to social justice, equality, science, medicine, maybe even kind of space travel, those sorts of things. Societal structures and the way, like, I think, one of the things I always think about, and you've seen, if you've kind of been tuned into this, you may have heard stories about how, like, one of the ways people are dealing in their golden years, so to speak, is communal living, right? So, and this helps to navigate the issue of seniors living on their own, for example. So anyways, that's just one tiny example that I think those sorts of things will be on the forefront. And of course, issues around justice, for marginalized peoples, issues around water, definitely, all of that. We're going to see, a lot, women's issues, a lot more of that, in the years to come. So I want to talk a little bit more about Aquarius. And I talked yesterday in the article about it, but I want to give you a few other little tidbits about Aquarius here. So Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer, right? And it's like the one who holds the juice of life, sort of thing. Aquarius is an air sign, not a water sign, but the symbol is the water bearer. And so, if you look back on the myths and the stories surrounding Aquarius in different cultures that all had a connection to the stars and studied astrology, and it was part of their daily routine, sort of thing. We've got, both the Babylonians and the Egyptians. They connected Aquarius to the gift of water from the heavens. So the ancient Egyptians saw Aquarius as sort of like the keeper of the Nile, right? And then in the Greek myth, there's a myth about Ganymede, who was a prince that Zeus abducted and brought up to Mount Olympus. And long story short, Ganymede was distraught because he saw how much the people of Earth needed water. And so he asked for Zeus's permission to rain water down on Earth, right? And so that happened. And we also have this connection, this interesting sort of roundabout connection to water, but Prometheus, who is really connected to Uranus in some ways, right? He stole fire from the gods, gave it to humans. But Prometheus had a son, and I can't remember the guy's name right now, but who, Prometheus said, build a ship, the floods are coming. The great flood is coming. Does this sound familiar to you? Right? It's the story, essentially, of Noah's Ark. And so just as an interesting aside, when I was I'll never forget this. When I was in grade 10, I had this high school teacher that I was taking a class called Ancient History, I think, or Ancient Civilizations. No, it wasn't grade 10, it was grade 11. And this teacher, he was this old guy who was fantastic. I remember his name was Mr. Assetti. Anyway, he was teaching us about certain myths and things like that. And he was the first person who, you know, made me realize that these stories are told in cultures all over the world, right? And he used the myth of Noah's Ark as the example, and he told us the myths from all the different cultures that all basically told the same story in a roundabout way of the story of the Great Flood, right? So that's really interesting. It's an aside, but it is connected, and so there is this connection. My point is that there is a connection to Aquarius as being the one who holds the water and who has the capacity to gift the water to humans. But that could also, extend beyond the boundaries, right? And go to the point of being too much, right? You're giving us too much. And then there's a flood. And you can think of water, in the literal sense, but you can also think of it in the sense of it's the wisdom, right? The wisdom of the gods, the universe, what have you. And so I get this, there's this idea, this whole notion to me of like water is life, right? I think we're going to see a big focus on water issues over the next little while. So, I have so much more to say, and I'm going to run out of time, but I did talk a lot about this in the article, so I really suggest that you read that too. But so the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, just to recap the details that I spoke about yesterday in the article, happens every 20 years, right? So it seems like, why is that such a big deal? It happens every 20 years. Well, every 20 years when this happens, it sort of marks a shift in the in society and the structures and it's like there's a notable shift in the sort of way we do life, right? And so that's definitely worth noting. But this particular Saturn-Jupiter conjunction is an even bigger deal because it is marking the beginning of a whole new 200-year cycle. So what happens is Saturn and Jupiter for 200-year time increments meet up in the same element, right? Water, earth, fire, air. So they meet up. In the last 200 years, they've been meeting up in the earth signs. There has been a focus for these last 200 years, right? Since like early 1800s or what have you, on the Industrial Revolution, the material world, money, structures, our exploitation of the earth, practical things, anything you can relate to the concept of earth, right? This heavy sort of, earth has this sort of heavy grounded nature, obviously. But then what happens on December 21st is we've got Saturn and Jupiter meeting up in Aquarius, and now for the next 200 years, not only for the next 20 years, for the next 200 years, this conjunction will happen. So it's in the air signs. And so it is this massive shift, right? From this earth energy to the energy of air, which is about intellect and communication and the exchange of ideas and, that which is sort of difficult to contain, right? All of these kinds of concepts. So the last time we had this going on was the birth of the Renaissance, massive explosion of like creativity and intellectual advancements and all of this kind of thing, and science, So this is where we're headed, into this kind of air era, right? Leaving the earth era and heading into the air era. However, it doesn't happen overnight. These things don't happen overnight. There is a gradual shift that occurs. So on December 21st, it's not like the whole world's going to change. I mean, I don't think so anyway. But in some ways, you know, that is happening because, like I said, 0 degrees, we're at ground zero of this shift. So what else do I want to say here about this? Well, I do want to repeat that something I mentioned yesterday in the article too, that so the way astrological cycles work is that just like I said to you that Saturn dipped its toe into Aquarius in between March and June to sort of do a little reconnaissance mission there and then came back into Capricorn and now is finally moving into Aquarius. Well, the thing is with these great conjunctions that happen, that it works the same way, right? Astrological cycles tend to work this way. So we had one sort of hit of the grand conjunction in an air sign in 1980-81. And that happened in Libra. So that was the first little, this is a taste of what's to come. Yesterday on the blog, I listed a bunch of events that happened around that time. So that's kind of interesting to look at. And you can kind of get a sense and you can think back in your own life. What was happening in my own life? What shifts and changes were happening then, right? That may have got kind of started or underway then, or I kind of got my eyes open to then. And then, you know, things receded a bit. And now here we are going to head full on into that energy, right? By the end of this year. So what does this mean for us personally? Because that's what people always want to know. Although I want to remind you again, we're all connected, right? So like what happens out there in the world, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, accept it or not, engage with it or not, it has an impact on us. And what we do in our own personal sphere and lives has an impact on the people around us and therefore society and the world at large, right? Saturn, Jupiter, the personal, our interpersonal social planets. So we can't escape that. That's the way it works. But people often want to know, you know, like, what does these kinds of things mean for me personally? Well, I already mentioned to you to take a look at your chart, if you know it, to see around the 0 degrees Aquarius mark and what's going on there, right? Of course, it always depends on what else is happening in your birth chart and how the planets are talking to each other, right? For you personally. But, you know, in general, the position that Aquarius sits in your chart, the house that it's sitting in, is the area that's, you know, at sort of approaching, at the time I'm recording this video, approaching ground zero of that big shift, right? For your own, in your own personal life. And so there is opportunity in that area of life for things like, you know, Jupiterian concept like growth and abundance and luck and good fortune. And also to create something of form and substance, which would be Saturn words, and also obstacles to overcome and, you know, hard work to put in and determination required, which are, you know, discipline, which are also Saturn words. And the other thing is that Jupiter can overdo it sometimes, right? Sometimes Jupiter doesn't know when to quit. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. So, but, you know, so there's that caution, but then Saturn is there, at least for the first, Saturn is there for 2.5 years. Jupiter is there for only a year. So Saturn is there the whole time Jupiter's there. And Saturn is there to set the boundaries, but also possibly to maybe push us to get out of our comfort zone in a way, because this is an Aquarius, right? And to remind us of that connection, that what we do in practical, real terms, Saturn, has an impact on the whole, right? Aquarius. So, you know, you look to the house that Aquarius is in your chart and you look to the themes that house speaks to. And that is the area of life that's undergoing the process of sort of contraction, Saturn, and expansion, right? Jupiter. And that contraction expansion is the birth process, right? Birthing something new in that area of life. So I'm not going to go through each of the signs in this video, and I know some of you might be disappointed by that, but in the article on my blog, if you go there, I listed for each rising sign the house that this is falling in for you and the themes that are being, indicated by this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. There was just too many other things to say in the video, and I didn't want to repeat what I had already said about that there, because that's super easy for you to go take a look at. The other thing I want to remind you of is that Pluto is still in Capricorn, right? Pluto's not going anywhere. Saturn and Jupiter are leaving Capricorn, but Pluto's remaining for the next couple years anyway. And so there is still, in the Capricorn area of your chart, right, which is the house right before Aquarius, there is still a process going on. But the real heavy emphasis will be moving on, because Saturn and Jupiter are leaving that area of the chart, right? And so Pluto's going to be there still. He's going to be doing his work of transformation, continuing to transform that area, but it will be a little bit more subtle as Pluto can be, but a little more subtle because Jupiter and Saturn are moving on, right? And Saturn, I've mentioned this in past videos, over the course of 2021, which of course I'll be here to talk to you about, but over the course of 2021, Saturn is making an aspect to Uranus 3 times, right? And this is a square. So interesting. Saturn in Aquarius, the sign it rules. Aquarius's other ruler, Uranus, over in Taurus, are going to be in this tense conversation, right? This dynamic conversation over the course of 2021. There's going to be, I really, really think, a lot of, like, this word boundaries. Like, we often think of Neptune and, Pisces associated with the concept of boundaries. And that is true, definitely. But I think that there is also, like, the way I think about it, there is also, this issue of boundaries comes up with this Saturn, Aquarian, Uranus energy as well, right? Pushing the boundaries, breaking free of the boundaries. Aquarius is very much a freedom-seeking sign, feels very much that everybody should be allowed to let their free flag fly however they choose, as long as it doesn't hurt others. Although they often take a little bit of a back seat to, and more of, they're more of the observer, and less of the judge when it comes to those kinds of things. Which is like, I gave you the example of sort of science for science sake kind of thing, right? Not really judging whether or not we should be doing what we're doing kind of thing. So anyway, I think that, that there is this, issue of, like I said, pushing boundaries, breaking down the boundaries, freedom seeking, this concept of we are all individuals, and we should all be able to enjoy our individual lives and freedoms, but we are also part of a larger society and a larger world. And so those are boundaries that we need to be really keenly aware of. I could go on and on and on. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm sorry for that, but there's just so much to say. And as you know, there's so much going on this week that I just, like I just shared with you. I'm just taking a quick look at my notes to see if there's anything else that I do want to point out. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this last thing. Even though, right, I mentioned to you in this video, I talked about, obviously the fixed signs. Aquarius is a fixed sign. So I mentioned the fixed signs. I mentioned the cardinal signs were just coming from all this Capricorn energy. So, if you have planets and placements around those latter degrees of cardinal signs, early degrees of fixed signs, this is impacting you. That doesn't leave the mutable signs out, though. We've got the nodes of the moon in Gemini and Sagittarius, right? As you know, so North Node in Gemini. Neptune is squaring. I spoke about this in a past video. I think that one of the things we need to keep our awareness on is that, and I'm seeing this in my daily interactions with people, and like my consumption of news and information and the exchange of news and information, that sort of thing, right? And ideas, that's very Gemini. That there's a lot of information to weed through, Gemini. A lot of people are going to have their own ideas about things, right? And it's up to us to decide what information is relevant to us, to make our choices accordingly, but to also understand that there are different ways to see things, right? Like, I'm just going to use a current example when we're talking about the COVID vaccine, right? We had the first COVID vaccine administered on a 90-year-old woman in England, I think yesterday or the day before, recently anyways. And so, and of course there is all kinds of debate going on, right, about this. And so, and people are going to have their own opinions, and there's going to be all kinds of news and information out there about that. And this is very North Node in Gemini. And it's very also showing us, the Aquarian themes, right? Debate over vaccines. So I think, that's something that's going to continue. The nodes are about a third of the way through the signs. And so that's not something that's likely to go away. So just be aware of that, right? And realize that we're kind of in this phase for the long haul here. So don't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. Gemini would never do that. And don't get yourself too spun out about these things, because it can be very, very, very overwhelming. Ultimately, what we need to do is really be discerning with the information that we're getting, and really, really tune into what feels right. Okay. All right. So enough of that rambling. You might be sensing that I kind of need a break. So I may not, like I said, I'm not going to be here next week. I probably won't be here until later on, just before the new year. Okay. But you can definitely catch me on Instagram, on Facebook and Instagram. And I'll leave you the link to that article below, and take good care. This is really life-changing, epic times that we are living in right now. So take good care, and I will see you next time. Okay. Bye for now.